Hey fellow backyard boys, I've received some comments and some questions, so today I'm going to be making an arrow. Specifically, I'm going to be making an arrow like the one in the Hunger Games. The first arrows that you see that are made of wood with feathers and broadheads. What you're going to need to start, and we're going to start with the arrow shaft, preparing the arrow shaft. So you're going to need a hardwood dowel. I'm using a poplar dowel. It says 5/16 of an inch. Now when you go to pick a dowel, it's not enough to just find one that's straight. You do want a straight dowel. But what's more important is the grain. And usually if you look, if the grain is straight, as you can see this line here, the growth rings in here, if that is straight, typically either it's going to be fairly easy to straighten this dowel, or the dowel is already going to be straight. And what's important is that it's straight, because if the grain is funky and all over the place, there's just lots of places where the dowel could fail and the arrow could break on you. You want to make sure that your arrow is as sturdy as possible, because when it's flexing, it needs to be able to flex a great deal without breaking. So once you've gotten that, as far as length goes, you want to cut this arrow 1 inch over your draw length, of the length you're going to draw this arrow. So if your draw length is 28 inches, you want to cut this at 29 inches. The reason being is we're going to lose some to the knock and some to the broadhead. So in the end, this is going to be pretty much perfect for a 28-inch draw. If you want, you can make it a little longer. That way you don't draw all the way to the broadhead. The arrow is going to stick out just a little bit. Alright. So now that you've got your dowel and it's cut to length, we're going to go and we're going to start cutting the area for the broadhead to sit and cutting the knock. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is cut the start for our broadhead to sit and our knock. And to do this, you want to look at the end of your arrow. You can see that the grain, or the growth rings, are laying down like this. Now we want to cut perpendicular to that. That's going to be where this wood is going to be strongest. If we were to cut this way, what will happen is that the knock and the broadhead will sit in line to the weakest part of the wood, and it'll actually drive the arrow apart, and it could cause it to break on impact or break when you're shooting it. So just for extra strength, you want to make sure that we cut into the wood perpendicular to the grain. I'm going to be using a hacksaw just to start it off. So you can see here, this is pretty much what you want to do. Now, I'm going to go with the hacksaw, and I'm going to cut into the point side 1.5 inches. That'll be enough for the tang of the arrow to sit, or the tang of the broadhead to sit, plus a little bit of this arrow shaft is going to actually rest on the broadhead itself to give it a little more stability. And then on the knock end, I'm going to cut in 1/2 inch. So I'm going to do that, and I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, so this is where the point is going to go. Now, one thing that I like to do is I take a file, and first I go ahead and I round off the point here. So real simple. Mainly just rounding the edges, as you can see. And now what you want to do is just go in and file and actually put an angle on the point here. Do you see that? Now just go back and round that off so that there are no sharp edges for things to catch. And you sort of want to round this point too. There it is. Now for the knock side, we've got a cut here, goes 1/2 inch. Take a tile saw, and you just want to go and you want to open this up. So I like to start from one side, go at a downward angle to help make sure that it stays straight and lined up. And then I go to the other side just to open this up. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that both cuts line up straight, because you want your broadhead to pretty much be in line with your knock here. You can see that right there. And I just go with my file again, and I just round off the very top here. Okay. So now I'm taking a sanding block. It's just a regular sanding block. It's got a coarse side and a fine side. And I'm just going to use it to go ahead and smooth everything down. Alright, so I've got a little bit of sandpaper, and I'm just using this to clean out the inside of my knock. Alright, there you go. And then one final thing is I like taking the corner of the file here and just run it through 1 or 2 times. This is just so it won't catch on the string. You can see. Alright, so once this is sanded down, we're going to apply some stain to it. So you just take your wood stain and you just rub it into the wood. Okay, so once it's stained, you just want to let it dry. Alright, so once the stain is dried, this is what your arrow shaft should look like. Now the only thing left to do to the shaft is to finish it, or to put a sealer on it. What I'm going to do is make and install the broadhead first. That way I'm going to actually spray the finish on the broadhead as well, and that will help inhibit any rust, just along the flats of the broadhead. So here's the arrow shaft. It's completed. So now let's go ahead and make the broadhead. Alright, so now we're going to work on the broadhead. So this is a broadhead that I've done in pretty much the same style that we're going to be doing today. It's a fairly narrow broadhead. It's about 3/4 of an inch wide, and this blade is 2 inches long. Cutting edge is about 2 inches. So what I'm going to be using for this is a steel tie plate. Now I'll list the exact dimensions of this tie plate. It's one of these tie plates, and we're actually going to be cutting our broadhead out of this area between these lines. So you can see I've already laid this out, and it's really simple. These little markings denote center, so if you can see, This is center, and then that center. From here to here is 2 inches, and then this is 5/16 of an inch wide. This little drop is about 1/8 of an inch from here to here from the drop, and then the actual edge is sort of you want to pretty much go triangular, but put a little bit of curve into it, a little bit of a convex curve. And once you've got this, you can cut it out with the hacksaw, or what I'm going to be doing today is I'm actually going to be cutting out with a pair of tin snips. So I've got my tin snips here. The first thing I'm going to do is cut this out from the rest of the tie plate. And one of these tie plates will give you about 8 broadheads. So here we've got this cut out. Now I'm just going to go and cut it out just like using a pair of scissors. So we've got that cut out. Now just go and cut the sides here. So now I'm going to go and cut along the tang here. Alright, here it is. Now if you use the saw, you should be able to go on to filing this and getting it to shape. If you use the tin snips like I did, you'll notice that it's all warped now. So we're actually going to pound this out with a hammer to flatten it out. And we're also going to use the hammer to harden the edges up just a little bit because we're not going to heat treat this. So I'll show you what that looks like. Here's the point. I'm just going to lightly pound these areas with a hammer just to flatten it out. So just go really light. So now that it's pretty much flat, what I'm going to do is lightly pound on both sides of each edge. This is going to kind of thin the edge a little bit, but it's also going to harden the steel, work hard in the steel a little bit. So there you go. So now it's nice and flat, and I've got just a little bit of the edge done. So now we're going to go file this and clean this up. Alright, so you take your broadhead here. I've got a file. So what I'm doing is I'm just truing up the edge here. Basically, you just want to go and file down the edges to bring the edges down to your markings and to balance both sides out. Another thing we're also going to do is you just want to clean up the edges back here on the sides. So I'm going to do that, and I'll show you what that looks like finished. Okay, here we go. I've just gone and filed this down, so you can see this is the shape we're at right now. The next thing I'm going to do is just lightly sand the surface here. I'm just taking off all of the markings and just giving the steel a nice even finish. Almost done. There you go. So here it is. Now at this point, you should be able to just take your broadhead and put it on your arrow like this. Okay, so to glue this, I'm just going to be using hot melt glue. You could use epoxy or really any type of glue you wanted to use. I personally like using hot melt just because it's easy to work with and it's also easy to fix later. So you just heat the glue up, smear some into the tang. Then you want to take this and physically heat up the tang of the arrow, or of the broadhead. So you take it, you press it onto the arrow shaft, and now while it's still hot, you want to go ahead and make sure that it's lined up to the point. And a good way to figure this out is to actually spin the arrow on the point, and it should spin nice and even on that point. That means that the arrow is now balanced. Just want to give it a little squeeze, and then you want to go and wipe off the excess glue. And pretty much here it is. So now that the glue's set, I'm using this. This is a thin thread of Fast Flight. I like using Fast Flight for wrappings just because of its excellent abrasion resistance. You could use anything, nylon thread, polyester thread, silk. And what we're going to be doing is starting right under the point. You want to go ahead and lay some of the thread down right at the point. You want to bring the thread around, back over. You can see that, and then you want to pull that tight. You want to move that wrap so it's as close to being right under the point as possible, and you just want to really pull it as tight as you can. So from there, you want to start wrapping the arrow shaft. You can see artificial sinew and real sinew work well for this as well. Okay, so once you've completely wrapped and covered up the tang, what you want to do is cut off about 10 inches of string. Right, once you've cut the end here, you want to take the loose end, make a loop over your finger, and bring this section under, like this. Once it's like that, then you start wrapping the main wrap around. You want to move about 1/4 of an inch of wrap. Then you take this loose end, bring it up here, and then you want to bring your wrap back over it like this. You want this to be nice and tight. You can see. Okay, so comes to the end, you take your loose end, pull it all the way through. You just want to go ahead, pull that as tight as you can, and then cut it free. Okay. Here's the point. So here it is, hafted and ready to go. So at this point the broadhead is dull, there's no edge on this. I usually wait till I'm done with the fletchings before I actually sharpen this. But at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking this, it's just a clear coat, and I'm going to spray down the whole arrow. Get the arrow shaft, the point, and the wrappings, and this will just help keep everything together, and it'll help keep the steel from rusting. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to move on to the fletchings. I just wanted to mention that these broadheads, while they will work, are primarily for this display arrow, but you could use these, and I've had good results with these. The only thing is that while they do hold a decent edge, the main body is really soft, so if you hit anything hard, they'll bend. Sometimes they'll bend hard enough to where you can't fix them. That's another reason why I use hot melt glue, because you can just heat this up, pull it out, put a new one in, and you're good to go. So here it is. Here's the finished broadhead. Alright, so now we're going to be fletching the arrow. Normally I use turkey feathers just because turkey feathers are a little more durable than a lot of other feathers out there. But if you've seen the Hunger Games and you've seen the arrows that Katniss uses in the very beginning of the movie, the feathers are really tattered and they almost look like feathers from smaller birds. So today I'm going to be using chicken feathers. These are 3 chicken tail feathers that I got from Hawaii Archer, or John. And so we did a little trade for these a while back. And so we're going to end up with something like this. So you can see the feather doesn't really hold together very well. And that's, if you've seen the movie, this is what her feathers look like. So we're going to be using these to complete our arrow. Now, the first thing you want to do is, I like to make sure that my feathers are all going the same side. So you can tell, just because of the way they're oriented, and they're pretty much identical, that they were all from the same part of the tail. Now what you want to do is you take one of your feathers, and I'm just going to be stripping them. So you start from the top, firmly grip, and then just peel it. Peel all the way down. Pick off from where it stopped. Peel down. Okay. So there we go. So now that we've peeled this down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the feather here and right under here. I'm going to do this to the rest of my feathers, and then we're going to go ahead and put them on the arrow. So I'm going to do this to the other feathers. I'm going to trim them, and then we're going to go put them on the arrow. Okay, so I'm going to be applying these feathers by hand. Now this arrow is mainly going to be decorative. Of course, you can shoot it, but first and foremost, it's mainly a decorative arrow. So I'm just going to be super gluing the feathers on. So we've got the feather, like I said. We just strip the one side down. So you're going to cut right about there, so you get a good start to it. And then right where that little poof is, just want to go and snip it right there. So now what you do is you just go ahead and apply a little bit of super glue to the arrow. So you don't need to use a lot, just a little bit. You just want to get a little bit of glue on the feather. Alright. And take your arrow. Now one thing I did, you see I wrapped up here, I did the same thing, and I wrapped for about, I'd say, about 3/8 of an inch. So what this is going to do is keep this from splitting. What you want to do is take your feather, start by looking at your arrow, and then you want to put one perpendicular to your knock. Your first feather will be perpendicular to your knock. Just go ahead and get it on there. Alright. Okay, so here you can see I've got the feather on, and it's perpendicular to the knock here. So the other two feathers we're going to glue on at about 120 degrees away on both sides. Okay, so here's the feathers on there. See how it looks? Now, chicken feathers and basically smaller bird feathers in general will do this if you go against the grain a little bit. They'll kind of bunch up and get all ratty. There's really not much you can do about it. But since that's the effect we're going for, that's pretty much perfect. So here it is. Now what we're going to do is clean up the ends here, and then we're going to wrap it. Okay, you want to take a sharp knife, and you want to take the end of this here, and you want to gently, very gently, sort of cut the feather. You see that? So what we've done is that the feather is less likely to catch. I'm going to do that for the three feathers right here. There we go. Alright, now we're going to be tying this. I'm going to be using some brown hemp. What I thought was interesting about the prop arrows that were used, that they were actually tied in places. So what we do is we start here. Wrap over the arrow, just a simple overhand knot. And you just want to tighten it. Now this first one, we want to make sure that we get it on the very front of the arrows. This will help keep the fronts from lifting. One thing too, you want to look down your arrow and figure out which side is going to touch the bow. You want to make sure that this knot here does not rest against the bow, or it's going to get abraded down. But the way the arrows in the movie were wrapped is that they were actually tied like this. So you tie it once, tie it as tight as you can, then you want to go and just double up the knot. So just tie it once more. Make sure it's tight. There it is. You just go back. You snip those. You want to leave about 1/4 of an inch on either side. There it is. So there are actually 3 or 4 wraps on this arrow. It depends. Different arrows had slightly different wrappings on them. So I'm going to go finish wrapping this arrow, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, here's the finished fletching. So you can see I've got my wraps on here. Let's see how it lines up. Here's the finished arrow. Now if you wanted to just keep it up on display, just leave it as is and keep the point nice and dull. But if you want to use this, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sharpen this up and show you what that looks like. It's very simple. Okay, so I've gone ahead and sharpened this. You can see it's got a nice little bevel on both sides. You see that? Now one thing that I do on my broadheads is that on the very tip, if you can see, I actually went really quick and ground it this way. So what I want to do is I want to take off that very tip, because that tip is usually a good place where it will break or roll over. This just gives the tip a little more strength, and you have an extra cutting surface right there. So I really like doing that on broadheads like this, where pretty much all you have is this. There's really no reinforcements on here. So you want to give your point all the advantages you can. So here we go. So now all that's left is to shoot this for you guys. So here we go. If I'll back our board. So here's the Hunger Games District 12 arrow that we made earlier. So I've got 2 of these arrows made, so I'm going to shoot them for you guys. Okay, so here I've got a watermelon. I'm just going to shoot these at the watermelon a couple times. So here we go. There it is. And this last hit kind of opened up the watermelon. So here we go. Alright, so here they are. You can see that even though the broadheads are pretty soft, they held up fairly well to going and hitting that plywood. This one you can see is a little bent, but they held up pretty well. So here they are. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye. So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed watching these videos along with me today. And as always, thanks for watching and your support, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.